Thank you everyone for coming here today. So I'm going to be speaking today. My talk today is actually inspired by a recent Hollywood film based on the fairy tale, The Beauty and the Beast. And the title of my talk is The Beauty and the Beast Within, Healing Our Specialness. So I think for those of us who are, spiritual seekers on the spiritual path, this fairy tale actually has a lot of meaning if we take a look at it and examine the plot and the characters. And in fact, I've kind of at times read, that fairy tales were in former times actually kind of a revelation of the unconscious mind in previous centuries. Many of the fairy tales were written in the 1700s, 1600s, 1500s, and so on and so forth. But they always revealed something, and they came through. And a lot of like Carl Jung, for example, who is a master of the unconscious mind, talked about that. And the Course in Miracles talks about that too, because the Course in Miracles, even in talks about this, and the Course in Miracles tells us that we have to bring the unconscious to the conscious mind in order to heal it. So there's a lot of similarities. Now, when I was researching, so what inspired this talk is I actually saw The Beauty and the Beast, the movie that was recently put out by Walt Disney, and I went to the movie with actually not very high expectations, just medium expectations, because I thought, well, I had seen the stage production, and I missed parts of it. I didn't really get it. But the movie, I have to say, was really wonderful. It was a great film. A lot of singing, a lot of dancing, a lot of great performances by the actors, and so on and so forth. And also in researching it, I realized that some of it, the original fairy tale is much different from, or there have been some changes to the one in the movie. But I'm going to stick to the movie version of it because that's what I think most people in modern times will know. So, what can we learn from the Beauty and the Beast? Well, I think on one level, we can all relate to both the Beauty and the Beast, right? Of Course in Miracles tells us that we are always in decision. We are either choosing with love or spirit, or we are choosing to be with the ego. Now, we can perhaps see this as Course in Miracles students as kind of being choosing between the beauty, our holy innocence, or the beast and the ego. And the Course in Miracles has plenty of passages where it talks about really the underlying fear and guilt of the ego and how it plays out in the world, right? And if we're honest about ourselves, we can see sometimes when we've been in our ego and how we have judged or condemned others, or how we have criticized, or how we have perhaps acted and hurt people in our own lives when we've come from the ego. So that's kind of the beast part, right? And the innocent part, or the part that is the beauty, is when we are in loving relationship with God and with our fellows, right? With our brothers and sisters in Christ. And we all have those experiences, and we remember those fondly as well. So that's one level in which we can see this. Now, I'd like to focus more, though, on the story itself, from the perspective of Beauty and the Beast, the two main characters. So, in the story itself, this is essentially what happens, is through circumstances, the Beauty character is named Belle, and she is living in a village, and she is not very much like the villagers. She's very sophisticated, she's very cultured, she's actually very well-rounded kind of person. And she has ambitions to live in Paris, the city that's far away from her village. Her father, at one point in time, did live in Paris, but moved to the village to escape some of the circumstances of city life. And he was a very loving father to her. And one day, he had to make a trip to fix a clock, I believe it was. This was one of the things that he did, or fix something. And he's on his way, he takes a horse and carriage and is on his way, and he's diverted by a storm, and he takes another path. and he ends up at this castle, this darkened castle. And he goes inside the castle, and circumstances has it that he offends the master of the castle, who is a former prince who has become a beast. So this beast is now, this beast is offended and locks up Belle, or the beauty's father. And so ensues our story from that point on. And what happens is we're then intrigued, and we find out what happened to this beast? How did this beast become a beast? And the movie kind of goes back and starts to tell us what happens. The beast, in fact, had one time been a prince, and he had ruled over this castle in this area, but he was kind of a superficial person. He was very wealthy, he had lavish parties, he had lavish friends, and it was a portrayal of a very kind of superficial life. And one evening, while he's having this amazing party with all these beautiful guests and beautiful gowns and lavish food and luxuries and dance and all this, it's raining, and there's a knock at the door. And when the door is open, he opens the door, and in walks this, I guess what would be today considered a homeless woman, okay? And she's living in the forest, and she comes in, and doesn't look so great, has a kind of a hood on and things like that. And she asks in front of all these guests if she can just have a room for the evening so that she can not be in the rain. And at that moment, the prince looks at her and laughs, and in a sense ridicules her. And then everybody that is in attendance at this party, taking their cue from the prince, laughs. He turns his back on her and returns to his party. Now at that moment, this woman, who appears to be kind of an urchin woman, right, is actually disguised as a fairy or an enchantress. And recognizing that the prince has much to learn, casts a spell over the prince and all of his assembled servants. Now, not everybody there, but all these servants that have helped raise him throughout his life. And the curse essentially is that he turns into the beast, which is this, picture of goes from being this handsome gentleman to this very kind of ugly creature, let's put it that way. And all of his servants turn into inanimate objects that are related to the function that they served him with. So someone turns into, I guess a manager turns into a clock, another character turns into a candelabra, and so on and so forth. And another, one of the woman who made food turns into a teacup, and her son turns into a tea kettle and a teacup. And so we have all these things that are made, that are turned into this, okay? So this is kind of what sets it up. Now, if you think about this, what I saw the movie, what I was struck by was what the Course in Miracles told us was that our original situation, the Son of God, when we forgot to laugh at the tiny mad idea. We were presented with a choice. Did we want to be separate? Did we want to think we were God? Okay? And in a sense, what we did was we turned our back on God. The separation happened. And what separation essentially means is specialness, right? We wanted to be special. We wanted to be different. And that's what happens in this story, right? The prince does not see the innocence of the person in front of him. He doesn't see the innocence and the likeness that is this urchin woman, right? He doesn't see that. What he sees is someone who is different from him. Now, the Course in Miracles says this: comparison must be an ego device, for love makes none. What did the prince do? The prince made comparison. He was superior to this woman. He was different from this woman. This woman made a simple request. He had this vast castle where she could have stayed for the night, and instead he decided to ridicule her. Specialness. He is different from everybody else, right? And especially from this woman. So, at that point in time, in the story then, we have this conundrum set up, this plot. Now, what the prince knows, or the beast knows at this point, and all of the servants know, that the enchantress has told them that the only way for him to be able to break the spell of the beast, and for all the servants to get back to their human form, is that he must fall in love. He must be able to have someone love him, and he love them, and they love him back. So, bring in Belle, the beauty. She finds out that her father, the merchant, has been imprisoned by this beast, and she's taken there by her father's horse, who brings her back. And in the first miracle of the story, what happens is that she demands the beast let her father go, and the beast says no. And then she offers to change places with her father. Okay? The first miracle takes place, right? She, out of love, knowing that her father would not survive in prison, in a sense, decides to exchange herself for the beast, for her father. Her father doesn't agree with it, but eventually she tricks him into it, and she becomes the prisoner. Now, in the beginning, Belle and the beast are in a special hate relationship, if you remember from A Course in Miracles. She is clearly, once the beast's physical appearance, he hides it, but once it's revealed to her, she's kind of taken back by the physical appearance of the beast. But also, she has a hatred toward him because he is depriving her of her freedom. He's been mean to his father, and he's not necessarily, he's a pretty grumpy fellow as well. Okay, so anyway, we have this kind of situation that's set up. Now, what ensues from this is, after this original miracle with Belle and her father, is that the servants kind of serve as the support to get Belle and the beast to connect, and which is kind of very interesting because they all see this as the opportunity to break the spell, and even the beast does in a little bit, but the beast sees himself as being so ugly that she could never perhaps find love in her heart for him. So what happens from there is that gradually he invites her to dinner. She accepts, and over a meal they begin to connect with one another, and Beauty begins to see the prince for who he is. Now, the prince, even before he became the beast, actually had some very nice qualities. He was a learned man, he had read books, he was cultured and sophisticated, and you could tell that in the time which he had been put into the form of the beast, that he had learned, that he had grown, that he had understood the mistake that he made by identifying with his specialness. And essentially, he became a better being, right? He became more loving, more kind, and understanding. And so gradually what happens is that Belle, who wanted to learn, was fascinated by his library. And he opened up his entire library to her. And gradually she begins to see his innocence and to see his wonderful qualities. So as we go along, there is a closeness that gathers there. And it is clear that the beast loves Beauty. But Beauty, at this point, although she admires this beast and is beginning to grow affection for him, does not love him. We then go to the part of the story where the beast must make a decision. He has this mirror, and he shows the mirror, and in the mirror Belle can see, she says, I want to see my father, because he won't let her leave the castle. So when he looks in the mirror, when she looks in the mirror, she sees that her father has returned to the town, and he wants the townspeople to come to help her get the father out. And the villain of the story, Gaston, who wanted to marry Belle, will not, they're not buying the story for various reasons, and so they determined that the merchant, Belle's father, is crazy, and they're going to put him away in an asylum. And she sees that, so she says she must go to him. And the beast, now recognizing that he must heal, he then says yes. He says, yes, you can go. So even though he loves her, and he's grown fondly of her, and in fact, if she does not return, that he will lose his opportunity ever to transform back into a prince and regain his holy innocence, allows this to happen. Now, needless to say, to kind of go to the story, she returns, and with the help of her father, to the village is now turned against the beast. They hear the beast. Gaston, who is spurned by Belle in the village, gets the villagers, preys on fear, and they are now coming back, and they want to attack the castle and kill the beast. They must kill the beast, because remember, the beast is always outside. It's not inside us, right? And so the villagers go to the castle to kill the beast and to take revenge upon, this threat that they see to them. Well, a long story short, essentially what happens is that Belle escapes with her, she gets her father out and escapes and gets back to the castle, and Gaston is there, and the beast protects Gaston. The beast protects Belle from Gaston, and eventually what happens is the beast is shot several times. Gaston, the villain, they're high up in the castle, he falls to his death. But the beast is also dying, and Belle is at his side, and as it seems that the beast dies, Belle professes her love for the beast. And suddenly, the spell now has been broken. The beast comes back to life. The whole village all the villagers are there now. It turns into a big party, and they're all reunited. So the village and the castle, which the prince once ruled over, is now celebrating. And what happens is, and what's very interesting here, is that the love that transformed the prince, the beast back to the prince, also transforms the whole community. It transforms it transforms the castle and the village, which when the spell had been cast, was essentially divided between the two. So they didn't even know about one another. So what happens here is the miracle that takes place is that the prince now and Belle's love is not just special love. Because special love, remember, we sometimes think of that as just happening between two people. But what I thought profound about the story was that when both professed love for one another, it healed essentially the prince's relationship with the village. And they became one community. And then all these other healings took place between the villagers and the members of the community, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of like the story that takes place. Now, how do we relate to this, right? How do we relate to this story? Well, I think that one of the ways that we kind of relate to this story is that's what A Course in Miracles is trying to teach us, right? The Course in Miracles is trying to teach us that our specialness is really rooted in our sense of difference. When we perceive ourselves as different from one another. Now, often in this world, we do that with our bodies, don't we, right? Well, that's one way that it happens. We see one body and we're attracted to one body and perhaps repulsed by another body. Perhaps it's personality traits, right? When we see someone who is loud and obnoxious, we may not like that person. Or maybe we do like the loud and obnoxious person, but we feel uncomfortable with the person that's shy and quiet, right? All these differences that we perceive, income levels, race, right? Red or blue states, okay? Those are all ego devices. Those are all examples of specialness and how we try to make ourselves different from the other. And what the Course in Miracles is trying to talk to us about is telling us is that we need to use this process of A Course in Miracles to do this. Now note that it is a process, okay? Notice what I said in the story, that this just didn't all happen at once. It was a complicated set of circumstances that took place. So what does A Course in Miracles say? It gives us a choice. What would they see instead? The shining radiance of the Son of God, so like his Father, that the memory of him springs instantly to mind. So our challenge is to look at and to see when we are perceiving our brothers and sisters, or we are perceiving ourselves, how do we see ourselves? Do we see ourselves with judgment? Do we see ourselves with condemnation? Do we see others with judgment and condemnation? Are we making comparisons and showing that we are different? And so what I want us to remember today is the story of the Beauty and the Beast. What Beauty and the Beast really did is they allowed the miracle of love to transform their specialness. And as they became one in love, they impacted their whole community and their whole world. And that's my talk for today.